to biodiversity cell in just 2 minutes, and then our students will take the session. So, good afternoon to all students. These all students are our biodiversity club members, Neha. And good afternoon to you also. I am quite thrilled to have you today. And I was just mentioning on Instagram feed that I have heard about a lot and always wanted to have you for our students. First time I, attended your lecture in Bangalore in Student Conservation Conference in 2017. So since then, I was looking forward to have you. Welcome, Neha. And Symbiosis University is in Pune. It is settled outskirts of Pune. It has a 350 acres of campus. Campus has a beautiful habitats, varied from forested patch, wetland, plateau and scrubland. So we have various kind of habitats, and so the biodiversity is also in a way of rich. So the founder of Symbiosis wanted to have a documentation. So we started it in 2016. Along with documentation, we thought that we should work on education, awareness, regular documentation, as well as conservation of whatever species we are finding every day and their habitat. And so the biodiversity cell came into existence. So these all are students who a biodiversity cell and have they enrolled themselves as a member of biodiversity cell. As you mentioned, this year somehow can't be on campus yet, but I'm very happy that they are very much special session to listen to experts like you. So these all students are here today who are biodiversity club members to know about experts, their work, and about wildlife and conservation. At the end, also I want to tell all students they have background from various programs. They are from business management, media, culinary, engineering. Symbiosis has 30 institutes, and these are from various institutes and from various background, including even law and UG and PG. Both they are mixed. So today we are having all that mixed group from various for your session, and this is it. And I really want you to be even continued in various subjects for our biodiversity club. So today we are going to start with the session which you recommended, magic of migration. And I ask or request Devdatta to introduce you formally, and we can start it ahead then.
Sure, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. So, good afternoon, everyone. I extend a warm welcome to all in another exciting wildlife session by the Biodiversity Cell of Symbiosis International Deemed University. I find immense pleasure in introducing our honorable guest for today's session, Ms. Neha Sinha, Policy and Advocacy Officer at Bombay Natural History Society. Ma'am studied conservation biology at the University of Oxford before joining BNHS. Her work specializes in the important bird area program and conservation policy. She is also an environmental columnist and writer. She has taught at the University of Delhi, received the Professional Legislative Fellowship sponsored by the US Department of State and the Wildlife Service Award from Sanctuary Asia in 2017. She has also served as a member of the Central Zoo Authority's Committee on Research and Publications. She writes for the Hindustan Times, Bloomberg Quint, Economic and Political Weekly, is a consulting editor for The Wire and Sanctuary Asia. She is also a member of IUCN Commission on Education and Communication. Ma'am, we are very grateful for you to accept our invitation and taking the time out of your busy schedule to be with us. We, the students of Symbiosis International University, are eagerly looking forward to acquiring knowledge, seeking guidance, and gaining insights from your thoughts and experiences. To all the students present here, if you have any questions, you can ask them at the end of the presentation during the Q&A session. You can either choose to type in your questions in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and ask in the end. I now request Neha ma'am to kindly take over from here as we begin with the event.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Devdatta, and thank you so much, Shilpa ma'am. I don't want to be called an expert. I want to be called a bird lover. But I just want to tell everybody here that you're so lucky to have a biodiversity club. This is not something I had when I was growing up. Now we have a lot more communities that, look at nature, that look at bird watching, butterflies, moths. Very lucky. And I am of the firm belief that the more things we do that are, the more diverse our interests are, the better students we become. I'm not, of the school of thought that, we should only be studying. I think it's very important to pursue our interests as well seriously. And I think that really contributes to personality development and to just being good students. I think to do well in your studies, you must also engage yourself in things that are not anything to do with your studies, such as biodiversity. And I'm also very happy to know that there's a mixed flock of people here. In conservation, I have had to study law and finance quite a bit myself, even though my subject is conservation science. There's a fair amount of law that I need to work with and engage with every single day, a fair amount of finance as well. So conservation actually, includes many of the subjects of which the students are here. If your bandwidth allows, do put your videos on so that I feel that I can see and hear all of you. And I'm going to be talking about migration today. And the reason I chose this topic is because the migratory season is still going on. And we still have migratory birds between us, amongst us today. And, you are in Pune, which is a little more south of where I am. I'm in Delhi. But even in Pune, there will be some migratory birds there right now. And I think, in my opinion, it's the most magical thing that happens every year. It boggles my mind the way a small bird crosses the Himalayas, the tallest, mightiest mountain range on earth, to come to the same tree, the same wetland every year, year after year. When I was growing up, I didn't have biodiversity clubs. I did not have anything. I had books. And every winter, I would see that there were new birds outside my window. And I would always ask, where are these birds coming from? Because usually they were migratory birds that had crossed the Himalayas and were in Delhi for the winter. And I never had enough information. Now you have so much information that, if you're interested in biodiversity, this is the time to be a student. You are at the right time in your life. Okay, I'm going to share my screen now. Just let me know if you can see it. Are you able to see it?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Shilpa ma'am, thank you for that introduction. I don't deserve so many kind words. Thank you.
You totally deserve
really
it.
always a pleasure when a teacher talks about special. I'm still a learner. I'm still a student. I'm a student for life. So, okay. So we are going to talk about the magic of migration. Does anybody know which is this bird sitting on the coast, and which is the bird that's flying in the sky? Any guesses? Which is the bird that's on the ground? No answer is wrong. So,
Is flying bird a seagull?
Okay. Yeah, the bird on the ground is the bar-headed geese. Does anybody know any more about the bar-headed geese? Okay, I'm going to tell you. So the bar-headed geese is the highest flying bird in the world, okay? It can fly over the Mount Everest. It flies from Central Asia, Tibet, China, Mongolia, and it comes to India every year. So this picture I've taken in January in Odisha. So they've actually managed to, cover the Himalayas twice a year. In the beginning of the year, as in towards the beginning of winter, which is the migration season, they cross the Himalayas and they come to us. And by the end, by the end of the year, by the end of the migration season, they cross the Himalayas again to go back to where they've come from, and they're able to do this by because they have a special metabolism in which they are able to kind of slow down the workings of their body. Because if you're flying above the Himalayas, you're at sub-zero temperatures, right? So any other animal cannot survive, but this has a special metabolism that enables it to basically slow down its body functioning and be able to fly that fast in climates. And the guy that's flying is actually a black-tailed godwit, which is also a migratory bird that comes from similar places, Central Asia, etc., to India every year, and it comes in a flock. And every year we almost see the birds coming to the same places, so they have intergenerational memory. It's like आपकी नानी ने आपको बताया कि winter में गाजर का हलवा खाना चाहिए, या we should eat giloy to give immunity to us. We have some intergenerational memories that our family gives us, right? Your mother will say, eat dates for iron in your blood. There'll be a family recipe in your family to make biryani or to make dal or to make, some special aloo ki sabzi. Similarly, migratory birds learn from each other, and they have migratory paths which they follow almost to the same places every single year. So they are territorial. And when the bird is coming every year, it may not be the same bird, right? Because it may die, it may be hunted, it may just die of old age, but they're teaching each other. So one generation teaches the next, and that's how they're able to make these really amazing and very long distance migrations every year in very, very adverse conditions. We'll come to that in just a bit. Okay, I think somebody has just made some marks, but just ignore that. So what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about where really do migratory birds go to? Where do they go to in India? And when we talk about migration, it's not just birds. Do you know any other migratory wildlife? Are you aware? I'll give you a hint. It's in the sea. Have you heard of any migratory animals in the sea?
Dolphins.
Yeah, that's not incorrect. Dolphins also do migrate, yes. So do blue whales. Do you know there's this amazing wild animal from Orissa that migrates? Have you heard of it?
Ma'am, elephants do also migrate.
Yes, elephants also migrate. Yes, elephants migrate between India and Bangladesh and India and Nepal, and they also migrate within the states. But the animal I'm talking about in Orissa is actually the olive ridley turtle, which comes from other countries to lay its eggs on the shores of Odisha in just a few beaches. It doesn't come in any random place. It comes in fixed places where it nests every year. And they also come from very far, and migration in the sea, as you can imagine, is really difficult because the sea is not only full of ships and full of pollution, there are also a lot of new things that have happened in the sea. There's a lot of plastic waste. There's a lot of ocean warming that has acidified the water. There's a lot of bleaching of coral reefs. And when I say it's migrating in the sea, I mean it's covering thousands and thousands of kilometers. So you have whales that come almost from Indonesia, they'll come towards India, they'll come from Australia towards Indonesia. So it's like really, really long distances which we can't even map properly because it's the open ocean, which is so big, and it's just so it's so wild and so dangerous. So but we're going to talk about birds today because that's what I work on, and that's what you can also see easily on your campus. So we'll talk a bit about where do migratory birds go. We'll also talk about what is the cost of migration. Why do they do this? It's taking a really long journey. Why do they need to do this? And do they die? Do they make it? Are they safe? We're going to talk a bit about how migration completely changes the landscape. Wherever we live, if you notice, migratory birds and animals change everything. The moment they arrive, the place looks like a big party, basically. And finally, we'll talk about what are our commitments to migratory wildlife. Does India have commitments? Why is it important to talk about commitments and conservation? So does anybody, for the first one, does anybody have a guess? Where do migratory birds really come to in India? Any ideas? Have you seen migratory birds?
Yes, ma'am. Little bit of it, like the Bharatpur Bird
Uh,
Sanctuary, Chilika Lake,
Right.
and Mumbai.
in
Right.
West Bengal.
Where did you see it in West Bengal?
Uh, I live in Chittaranjan, so I can see here also.
Which bird was it?
Oh, I don't know the name.
What did it look like?
Blue, I guess.
Blue.
Must be kingfisher, but it's not
No, no, no.
migratory. No?
Grandala?
It's
It
not.
can't be
It's
Grandala.
not grand. It's not
Grandala is
kingfisher.
only in Sikkim, no?
It's bird-eater
Bird
flycatcher.
flycatcher, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, verded flycatcher comes from Nepal and Himalayas. That is also a migratory bird. Okay, good. So, that answers the first question. A lot of people think migratory birds only come to wetlands, while the fact is most of them do come to wetlands. This is a wetland near my house in Basai in Haryana, and Bharatpur is a wetland, Chilika is a wetland. But the fact is, we also do get migratory birds that come to other sites that are not wetlands. So you also have migratory birds that come to forests, such as the verded flycatcher, which is an absolutely gorgeous bird. Please look it up. Is this powder blue color? I can't really describe the blue. It's basically a flycatcher blue, and it comes from Nepal, Himalayas. It comes down to Delhi. It comes to West Bengal. It doesn't go very far down south, but it spends the winter here. And so basically, yes, wetlands are very important for migratory birds, but it's not just wetlands. And before we go forward, I just wanted to tell you a bit about birds. And this looks very basic, but I think it's important that we need to talk about this. So this is a passerine bird. A passerine bird is a bird that perches on branches. Okay, a passerine bird is different from a wetland bird. The difference is this is a wetland bird. Can anybody just tell me what is the obvious difference between these two birds, the second one and the first one?
Ma'am, it's feet. Probably that is what
Size
I
of the
come to
legs.
Yeah, exactly. So usually a wetland bird or a wading bird that wades in water is going to have long legs. And this kind of bird you won't find sitting in a branch like this. So a passerine bird is basically a bird that usually sits on a tree. Okay, and it perches. It basically perches on a tree, and a wetland bird will not perch on a tree. It will be in the water or next to the water. And these basic adaptations, which are part of evolution, are important in our understanding of birds. Okay, so what we see here is a bird, and these are of course the parts of the bird which also we should just know about a little bit. This is the eye, this is the mustache. It's in order to identify birds, I can just give you very quick tips, because there are 1,300 bird species in India, and more than 10,000 bird species in the world. So it's not easy. There are many kinds of birds. It's a very well studied taxa. If we studied all the taxa of all the animals on earth, there would be many that we would find. But the fact also is birds are highly evolved, and there are many, many different kinds. So in order to identify birds, easy ways to identify is to look at the markings on the wing, to look at the length of the tail, what kind of legs it has. So usually if it has long legs, it tends to be a wading or a wetland bird. And if it has these kind of short legs, then it tends to be a passerine bird that perches on trees. You see this particular bird has a small beak. Some birds have long beaks, like sunbirds have really long beaks. Does anybody know why a sunbird has long beaks? Okay, the beak is like a straw. It basically has to put its mouth inside a flower to get the honey. So it has to have a long beak. That's a tool to get the nectar and the honey. But this is a bird this is a warbler that basically eats small insects. It doesn't need a very long beak. Then you have a bird like a parrot, which has a beak which is very strong and big in order to, break fruit, in order to bite into fruit. Okay, now the reason I'm showing you this bird is because this is also a migratory bird. So on the right, you have, this is a warbler, and this warbler, it's so tiny, it's literally the size of a sparrow. It also comes to India from Central Asia. So it's coming from Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, etc. And it comes every year in winter. So this tiny bird is making the journey every year, which is several thousand kilometers. So migratory birds are not just water birds. Migratory birds are also these kind of birds like warblers, flycatchers, as we discussed, which are coming to India. Now this is a red yellow wattle lapwing, which is not a migratory bird, but I'm just showing you this water bird. And as I said, when you look at a bird next time, just look at the leg adaptations. You'll probably be able to tell what habitat the bird is found in by looking at the legs and by looking at the beaks, right? So we are part of the Central Asian flyway. To answer the question as to where birds come and where do they come from, so this red line that you see is the Central Asian flyway. So most of our birds that migrate to us are coming from Russia, Mongolia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, China, and they come down. And of course, there's this huge Himalayan range that they have to, most of them have to cross the Himalayan range. Some of the birds use passes between the mountains. So, they have that memory and they figured out what are the best ways, but the bar-headed goose is flying over the mountains. And some of the birds also come from Pakistan side. So they actually cross the Karakoram range. And we've had a lot of satellite tagging in which birds are caught and satellite collars are put on them to get a live signal to see exactly what is the route. I'll show you some that we've worked on. And so we are able to get signals as to the exact routes they follow. But just to say that, this is a very difficult path, as you can tell, right? There are mountain ranges on both sides of India. So whether it's the Pakistan side or whether it's the Himalayan side, which is basically right from Kashmir to the northeast, you have mountains, right? So it's for a tiny, tiny bird like this, it's not looking so tiny here, but it's a really tiny bird. It's smaller than a sparrow also. So, it's a big challenge. And on top of this, this is the second point I wanted to get to. There are very high costs of migration. It's an epic journey, So why do they do this? Why do they need to do this? And is it successful? So this is a bird I saw yesterday. I was out in the field all day yesterday. This is called the northern lapwing. It actually breeds in Britain, Ireland, and basically that latitude of Britain and Ireland. And it doesn't come too much, not too many numbers to India. So I was very lucky to see it. It's a beautiful bird, as you can see. And again, this bird is making a very long and difficult journey. So why do they do this, and are they able to succeed? This is just a map that's showing you all the migratory pathways of the world. There are 8 or 9 migratory pathways. And you can see India is doing this north to south migration. Most of the migrations on Earth are north to south, meaning when it's winter and it's cold, the birds from the north will move towards the south, okay? So you also have in the Americas, you have Northern American birds moving to South America. So if we have to conserve these birds, we have to work together. So we can't, keep saying India and Pakistan don't get along, India and China don't get along. So if we conserve our birds and if they don't, or if they conserve birds and we don't, the entire species is affected. So transboundary cooperation is essential for migratory species. So if US is fighting with Mexico, then the birds and the butterflies get impacted, because even butterflies do migrate. And just to say, at the end of winter, when it gets really hot, all these birds are going to go back, okay? They're going to go back to the north where they came from. And they do that because they're breeding actually in the north. So they're breeding in Russia, China, Siberia, Central Asia, Mongolia, etc., all those places. And the chicks are born, the chicks become big, and then they migrate here in the summer. So it's basically exhausting to be a bird, is what I'm saying. If you're a migratory bird, your life is pretty hard, okay? So on the left, you have this bird, which is actually a rosy starling. Have you seen rosy starlings? Anybody? Pune is full of them, by the way. Next time you see this bird that looks like a mena, that's kind of pink and white, a pink and black and white, it's actually a rosy starling, and they actually come from Central Asia, and they spend a very long time in India, but they're not resident Indian birds. So on the left is this flock of birds I found in Kyrgyzstan, and I didn't actually know what bird it was when I saw it, because actually it's a juvenile rosy starling. It doesn't look anything like the adult. So I thought it's a thrush or something, and I was just, I had to ask around to find out what it was. But what I was seeing actually was the chicks and the juveniles, the young ones that are born in Kyrgyzstan, and the same species that grows up, it becomes an adult. On the right is the bird that's the adult, and it comes to Delhi, it comes to Pune. In Pune, you'll see them eating samal trees on samal trees. When samal, the red flower, it flowers, they're usually on samal trees in Nagpur and Pune.
We
And
have
then
in our campus.
I'm sure you do. It's a lovely tree and it's a lovely bird. So this bird will come in a big flock, and it's very noisy. It's always talking, like the very talkative bird, and it'll just you can hear it before you see it. So then it comes to Delhi after it comes to Pune. So it crosses the mountains and it comes south towards India. It stops in Delhi for a very short time, and then it'll go to you. It'll go to you in Pune. It'll spend time there. Most of the time it spends there only. And then it'll come back to Delhi, say around April, and then it will go back to where it came. So these juvenile birds are born in Central Asia, and then they grow up and they come here. So long journey. But I'm talking about the costs of migration, and is it getting easier? Is it getting harder? So you all know about climate change, and climate change impacts some species positively, but most species it's impacting negatively. So for example, the jellyfish in the sea is doing very well because of climate change, because it thrives on warmer waters. So certain species are doing better, but most species are not doing better because most species are very highly connected to the ecosystem. So any ecological change that happens impacts them very badly. So there are many studies such as this one which says that because there's global warming, so a lot of the Arctic birds are coming to India, right? From the North Pole. Now there's a lot of warming over there. There's a lot of ice melt over there. So the time at which the birds used to nest used to coincide with food that was available for them, right? That's one example. Or the time that they left for migration has now changed because it's become so warm. So they have to leave earlier now because it's too warm for them already in the North Pole or in the Palearctic region, and therefore they have to make longer migration journeys. The overall effect is not only when the chicks are born, there's not enough food, because a lot of birds lay eggs and the chicks come out at the time when lots of insects are available. For example, when insects are pre-producing, or when particular flower is blooming, right? So because they need food, and they've all adapted and evolved in a manner in which they're able to take advantage of all this, right? So the bird chick being born when there's a particular flower that's blossoming, or a particular fruit that's available, particular insects that are available. So not only is their food resource being compromised, the fact is that they have to leave earlier every year because of the global warming, which means overall the journey of migration is becoming longer because they're spending longer time migrating. And the second thing is that there's also a lot of pollution load that is there in the world and in the ecosystem, that along with the climate stress, along with the fact that they themselves are physically tired, will also lead to birds getting more diseases, because there is an impact of stress on disease. So it's called physiological impacts. So for example, if you're feeling tired, you may or if you're feeling anxious or sad about something, you may fall sick more than when you're feeling happy, in a simple term. So if something bad has happened to you, you start feeling ill, you start feeling feverish. It's a breakdown of the immune system. So it's similarly with birds as well, or animals, any animal. Basically, if you are under stress and chronic stress, you may fall prey to disease more. So, birds, for example, get bird flu. A lot of wild birds get bird flu, but there are two kinds of bird flu. One is the kind that is low impact, which many birds get, and it's like a common cold. They recover very fast. And the second is high impact kind of strains of bird flu, which is connected to H5N1, which, is there in India right now. And because there is pollution load, chemical load in the ecosystems, plus the fact that there's global warming, which is stressing the animal or the bird, plus the fact that, the migration itself has become longer or harder, that is definitely going to contribute to more disease outbreaks in the future. And we all know about coronavirus. Even coronavirus is something that was predicted a couple of years ago, because there are many papers that say that, there are many pandemics waiting to happen, because animals and wildlife are more stressed than before. and the viruses that are dormant in them may get released. And the second thing is, there are a lot of viruses in permafrost in the poles. They are going to get released because the permafrost is cracking and basically warming. So bird flu has happened this year in India. Last year there was botulism, which is not the same thing, in Sambar Lake, but almost every year we have bird flu now, and almost every year birds are dying. So all kinds of birds, okay, not just migratory birds, but also birds that live here, like crows and pigeons, are also dying. And the third thing is that the wild bird can infect the domestic bird, which is how they infect the chickens, and that's why they cull chickens, right? So the more stress we are creating in the wild animal, the more likely it is going to be to get sick and to not have a good immune system. So generally scientists are saying we need to make sure we provide good habitat to birds to be able to stop and rest. So not every bird, they don't just need places to eat, they also need places to rest in, they also need places to hide in, they also need places to just sleep and spend time before they go to the next migratory spot. Okay, it's just like us. We need a bed to sleep, we need a room where we can just be quiet, we need to spend time with our friends, we need to go to work, we need to go to school and college, we need all these kinds of places. So sometimes they need stopover sites where they're just stopping over to rest before they can move forward. I want to show you this video, I hope it works. I took this yesterday. Sound is bad.
Eurasian marsh harrier.
Yes, very good, very good. So this is a migratory raptor, and that's the third kind of bird I want to talk about. That birds of prey are also migratory. Birds of prey also migrate to India, and if you are the scoot, these guys in the water. See this marsh harrier is basically hunting the coots, right? So now they're terrified and they're totally panicked, right? And it's going to keep doing this until it gets its lunch, right? So if you're a sick bird, you're going to die. If you're a sick bird, you're also going to give the sickness to all these other birds, because this is a bird that flocks together, right? So usually a sick wild animal is usually a dead wild animal, because they don't have any provisions to, they don't have ATMs to get money, they don't have restaurants to get food, they have to hunt for food, they have to find places to rest in, they have to do everything by themselves. So they can't really afford to get sick. Usually sometimes they recover, but many times they don't recover and they die. So this is a western marsh harrier. It's coming, it also migrates to India, so it's found now at this time. I was very happy to see it. And those coots are resident birds that live in the wetland. Okay. So the third thing I wanted to say is, migration completely changes landscapes. So one of my earliest memories of birds in Delhi was actually, I found these new birds outside, my house in winter, and I would always ask, where have they come from? Who are they? They were rosy starlings. These are rosy starlings, and this is a samal tree. So actually, this bird is spending time with the samal trees in Pune and Nagpur. By the time it comes to Delhi, the samal doesn't have flowers. So you can see that only those are, there are no flowers left on the tree. That's actually the pod that is going to break out into the silk cotton kind of thing. That's why the tree is also called silk cotton tree. So by the time it comes to this tree, there's actually no flower for it left, but it's coming to rest on this tree every year. So I monitor this tree, and every year I see that they come to the same tree every year just to rest. Again, it's a stopover site for them. So I'm emphasizing that they don't just need sites where they're eating and feeding, they also need sites to rest in where nobody will disturb them. And the more we disturb them, the more we stress them, the more chances are of disease, of death of populations, and generally of the species dying out. I don't know if you know about the saiga antelope. This is an antelope in Central Asia. It's a very funny looking animal. It looks like something out of Star Wars. And there was a mass die out of the saiga antelope. Thousands and thousands of them died. And similarly, in last year in Botswana and a couple of African countries, there was a mass die out of elephants, in which hundreds and hundreds of elephants just dropped dead because of disease, a bacterial disease. And this does happen. Wild animals do get disease, but usually populations are able to recover because of, generally, that's nature, right? You would say that that's nature, that disease should happen. Disease has a role in nature to control populations. But if you have disease plus climate change, plus reduced habitat, plus our interference in terms of pollution, all kinds of pollution, noise pollution, light pollution, chemical pollution, it becomes really hard for the population to keep recovering, right? That is the difference now. There's always been virus and disease, and there's a role that virus and disease also has in the ecosystem. But because we've transformed ecosystems so much, it becomes very difficult for these guys to actually come back and to bounce back after population crash. So there's a rosy starling on a peepal tree. They eat the figs of the people. So this is the last section of my talk. I wanted to talk about what are our commitments. Do we have any commitments to migratory wildlife? Is anyone aware whether we have any commitments as a country to migration and migratory animals? So have you heard of the UNFCCC for climate change? United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. The law students must have heard of it. So the UNFCCC is the convention for climate change under which there was the IPCC study. So similarly for migration, we have the United Nations Convention on Migratory Species, the CMS. Convention on Migratory Species is something that India has been part of for many years, and many other countries of the world, almost more than 170 countries, I think, are part of CMS. And under this convention or this treaty, we have pledged to protect our migratory species. So whether it's the turtle or the dolphin or the whale or the bird, or even, there are insects that migrate too, like butterflies, and dragonflies also do migrate. So this is the Amur falcon. This is a bird that I work on. I've been working on this bird since 2013. And the Amur falcon, the flock is on the right in Nagaland. It actually crosses the Indian Ocean every year. It comes down from Mongolia, Amur, and Siberia to Nagaland and to Northeast India. And it crosses, India. It may stop in Pune also. It in fact does stop in Pune. And then it crosses the Indian Ocean to go to Africa. And it crosses the Indian Ocean where there are dragonflies. So dragonflies are also migrating, okay, over the Indian Ocean. So the bird chases the dragonflies and it eats the dragonflies, and then it reaches Africa. And, we have a commitment towards both the falcon and all the other animals that are there listed in the Convention on Migratory Species, including elephants, including great Indian bustards, including tigers if they migrate. There must have been a time when tigers must have migrated between Bhutan and India or between Nepal and India, but now some of the links are a little bit broken. But legally, we have to protect these birds and animals which are there and migrating. Okay, so I wanted to show you, this is a map that we made of the Amur falcon migration. So the Amur falcons have been satellite tagged, and this is a one-way path I'm showing you. So it's coming from Mongolia, and it's stopping in this is my field site in Doyang in Nagaland. And these are two birds, so they've taken two slightly different routes. So one is going from Gujarat, the other is going closer to you, which is in Bombay. And then it goes, it's such a long migration, and it's a small bird actually, okay? Smaller than a pigeon, this bird. And it does 22,000 square kilometers, 22,000 kilometers every year. So it's going to fly back like this, or it'll fly maybe from over Europe. And imagine, all the things the bird must be facing on the way, not just mountains, but also the sea, and also electric wires. Sometimes birds collide with electric wires, and it eats insects. So, it's a bird that needs insects. One of the reasons the sparrow was not doing well is because the sparrow feeds insects to its chicks. And there are actually less insects left in the world today because, we use a lot of pesticide and insecticides, and there's a lot of chemical load in the atmosphere. So actually, when you were growing up, I know it seems there are too many insects in the world because nobody likes insects. But actually, if you remember when you were growing up, or ask your mother or father or grandmother, how many insects they had when they were growing up. Now, the populations have really, really crashed. It's being described as the insectageddon, like the Armageddon of insects. So when I was growing up, for example, every time it would rain, we had these huge crickets that came inside the house, and they were really big guys. And there were these tiny black insects that covered every surface, when it would rain. And now they're not there. They're just not there in Delhi. And I'm not just talking about Delhi, across the world, even in forest areas, even in smaller cities, insect numbers have come down. So if you're a bird like Amur falcon that eats insects, you need to have insects in the world for this bird to survive. And one of the reasons it probably comes to Nagaland in October is because there are termites at that time of the year. Again, everything is connected. So if we have changes in ecological systems, the birds and animals are not going to do well. So it rains a lot in Northeast, and in October there are termites. There are millions of termites in the sky. There are less termites today than there were earlier, but still there are, it's still a good ecosystem. So they're coming and they're eating the termites. They stay in Nagaland for a month and a half, which is their stopover feeding site. In which case they become fat. They come, they're thin because they're really tired and thin. And then they leave, they're slightly fatter. But I have to tell you that, they were being hunted over there. This is an Amur falcon caught in a net, and they were being hunted, thousands and thousands every single day. About 10,000 birds every day were being hunted. And so we kind of did these, we did a lot of things. We did eco clubs, we worked with the government, we worked with the local community. And today the hunt has stopped. We are very grateful to, the local community for stopping the hunt. And this is a monolith. A monolith is a traditional structure of respect that has been made by the local community, honoring the Amur falcons, honoring the various organizations that work on Amur falcons, and also saying that we are not going to hunt Amur falcons. But just to say, migration changes the landscape in many ways. One is, visually you see more birds and animals, but sometimes you also have these threats like hunting. And if, for example, birds are migrating to a particular grassland and the grassland gets burnt at the time the bird migrates, such as sociable lapwing is an endangered bird, critically endangered bird that comes to Gujarat every year. If we burn the grasslands where it comes during winter, the bird is just going to, the population will just crash completely. Or if there's a wetland, like I showed you the very first slide, actually, the reason I showed you that wetland, this is such a bad wetland. There are buildings, there's a lot of pollution, there's garbage, there's hyacinth on the line, which is an invasive species. Most of the wetlands today are looking like this. There's a transmission line. If there's a big flamingo, a big bird, it's going to go right into that wire and it's going to die. We have transmission lines running through wildlife sanctuaries as well. Right outside the sanctuary, the transmission wire. And if something scares the bird, I've seen this happen in front of my own eyes. I'm talking to you, but how the impacts come together and impact the species. So suppose there are too many dogs, again, a problem that we've created. The dog goes in the water and the flamingos suddenly fly up because they are scared. And there's a wire right there. So they're all going to die together. Okay, so wire is a bad thing to have next to a wetland. And there are all these buildings, of course, and all these invasive species like water hyacinth, and pollution, too much pollution in the water. So we have created these problems, which is something migratory species have to tackle with every year for long periods of their life, right? So that makes it very difficult for them. It increases their stress. And these are all things we have to keep in mind when we talk about migrating wildlife. Even for, olive ridley turtles, they're getting caught. They have pieces of plastic inside their mouth. They have all these nets that they keep getting caught in. They live their life, with these strange, shapes because they get caught in the net and they're not able to get out of it. And the shell grows in a funny way. Or, the flippers get, really impacted. But just I wanted to end on a happy story, which is, the community has really come forward to protect Amur falcons. Today, the Amur falcon is a famous bird, thanks to the community in Nagaland. And Now, when there's a single Amur falcon that comes to Lonavala or to Pune, everybody goes to photograph the bird. It's become a celebrity. And just a few years ago, when I started work on the species, nobody knew about this bird. So, there can be, we can change things, as long as we know what our purpose is, and as long as we're willing to work with each other and not to just take credit, but also to give credit. And today the Amur falcon is famous. There's still a few other migratory species that need this kind of celebrity status, and that need this kind of attention. And we can't change everything. We can't change global warming in terms of what's happening in the Arctic, but we can certainly speak up for the migratory wildlife that's in our backyards or in our campuses. We can certainly try to reduce single-use plastic that we are using in our own lives. We can certainly try to talk to decision makers around us to consider also the needs of the tired bird that comes over the mountains every year, and not just us and not just what we need, but also, all the other, animals and trees and birds that we have in the world. And I just want to end. I have a new book out. It just came out. It's called Wild and Willful, and it basically talks about 15 Indian species, including the Amur falcon, including some migratory wildlife. And I just feel that things are bad now for wildlife, but I still am confident that we can change things. And it all starts with knowing the name and knowing what the animal needs. As long as we can identify it and we figure out what it eats and where it lives, I think there's a good chance for wildlife. Okay. I will take questions now.
Okay.
I'll just
Congratulations, Neha,
Thank
for
you.
the book.
Thank you so much.
Can we see the book again?
Yeah, sure.
It's Wild and
Willful.
okay.
It's got two. Sorry, it's got two elephants fighting on the cover.
Lovely
So
cover.
basically, I wanted to talk about, the needs of wild animals instead of talking about what we, need all the time. So it's got tiger, elephant, leopard, great Indian bustard, Amur falcon, rosy starlings also.
Okay.
Tiger butterflies, fluffy-tip butterflies, the Ganges River dolphin, which is doing very badly now because of the National Waterways Act, and crocodile, king cobra. So 15 species. Also the rhesus macaque monkey, the monkey that we hate so much.
Why?
Yeah, because it's aggressive, and because it slaps people, and because it opens the fridge, it comes inside the house. It's all our fault. They're displaced animals. There's a lot of conflict with rhesus macaque monkeys in North India because they are hungry all the time. They don't have good forests to forage in, so they come out in the city. And so there's this whole move for wanting to cull the animal, to shoot it. There have been many orders in the States, and in Shimla they've been shooting the monkeys actually. Yeah, but we kind of created the problem because the tourists feed the monkeys, and then the monkey kind of begins to expect food from people, so we should not be feeding wild animals ever. And when the tourists are gone, the monkeys go to other people, and other people don't want to give them food, and that's how the conflict starts.
Okay.
I love this bird. I saw it yesterday. I was very excited. It's the first time I saw it. It doesn't come.
Yeah, it's very rare. I also when saw it on Instagram in your post, I was like, wow, fantastic.
I can't believe such a colorful bird is a migratory bird. Usually they're not so. It must be finding it hard to hide also, no? This
yeah, beautiful, nice.
I have a question to ask to Neha, ma'am.
Yes, please.
Yeah, Neha, I'm not a student of Symbiosis, just a bird enthusiast, you can say. Okay. And I'm talking from Lucknow. This is because of the Instagram post which I was following. I just wanted to know, do we have in India something like as mass migration as we witness in US? And do we have a migration forecast so that if I want to visit maybe next year, I mean, how to know more about it?
Well, we do have mass migrations of birds and of turtles. So the turtles that come in Odisha, actually, it's called Aribada, which is they come to lay their eggs. So all the turtles that come are females, first of all, and they come to the coastline in designated places. Like those are places that they have chosen. So there are just 2 or 3 of those mass nesting sites. One is Rishikulya. The other is Dhamra, where unfortunately they've made a port over there. So the Odisha tourism usually gives out a lot of these, they have a lot of ads in the paper or, on their website talking about the turtle nesting season and when they come, and a lot of tourists go there to see it, to witness it. And in terms of mass migration of other species, birds definitely mass migrate every year. So we have many birds that come in literally thousands. The Amur falcon migration is a mass migration. So you're welcome to go to Nagaland and I can give you contacts. We've also been working on homestays and ecotourism there. So the community gets certain benefits from the birds. And of course, there are the geese and the ducks. So you're in Lucknow, but Rajasthan has a lot of sites where there's mass migration, Sambar Lake, Bharatpur. In fact, any good sanctuary.
Yeah, Nawabganj Bird Sanctuary near Lucknow for Siberian cranes.
No, Siberian crane is extinct now in India. It must be some other. Yeah. So, Siberian crane is another migratory bird that actually went extinct, sadly, because there was a lot of disturbance on the flyway, the route it took to come to us. But any bird sanctuary you go to in winter will have really thousands of migratory birds. So it's a mass migration and they come together in flocks. So, yeah.
And as an individual, how can we contribute besides protecting their habitat as an individual? I mean,
yeah, I think protecting the habitat is the very first thing. If we don't have habitat, we don't have anything. Everything else comes after. So if we are able to talk to our local MLAs, town planning, etc., on our level to say, leave spaces wild, don't manicure everything. We don't need so many malls. We don't need so many buildings everywhere. We also need places which are open, right? That's one thing. The other is also, I think, if we know names of things, we can grow to love them. You can't really love things if you don't know what it's called. Like there's so many birds. To a person who doesn't know the name, they're all birds, right? So koi kehta hai ki there's so many crows and pigeons, why do we need to save birds, right? So like this bird, another lapwing, like people don't know about it. And so they'll think that as long as pigeons and crows are there, we don't need to save this. So, just talking on an individual level as much as is possible through activities like this, telling people the names, telling them what you know, telling them just some personal story of yours or some wild animal. I think it really helps because, just 50, 60 years ago, people were hunting tigers in India, and it was okay to do that. Today, nobody can do that because there's been a cultural change. Today, nobody will say, "Main tiger ka shikar karta hu," or, nobody will say, "I want to hunt a tiger." So we'll come to a point eventually where we say we shouldn't hunt any wild animal and we want to protect all wild animals. I just hope till that point we don't lose all the habitat because we're losing habitat very, very fast. So I would say just telling people about wild animals. There are many wild animals and they all have different needs. They all have different, food requirements, habitat requirements. Knowing names, knowing stories is a very, very important step in conservation. So spread the word.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
It was a wonderful session. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Kshitija, for joining us. That's really nice.
Yeah, it was a pleasure.
So Neha, you rightly said that understanding simpler things like knowing birds and then going for saving habitat is the first and very important thing, which even we are doing in Symbiosis. Like wetland, which was created in Symbiosis in 2015, was only for consumption of students and the employees because it's a residential campus. Like more than 3,000 students stay on campus. So they created this wetland only to have, water during summer and all. And then biodiversity cell, when observed a few birds landing at the water body, then we started restoring that wetland. And today we get, migratory birds like ruddy-shelled duck and green sandpipers. Yeah, that's a fantastic success story for us also. And now,
Yeah.
Like this year again we went few steps back in terms of we have got this new medical college coming up in the campus, and for the higher requirement of water, they started pumping more and more water in the water body, and the banks which we had restored and the marshland we had created is completely submerged again this year. And that's why we observed that this year very few ruddy shell ducks have arrived because they don't have place to stand. As you mentioned, that was the place they have chosen since last 3 years, and it was a very a new place for them, but they have chosen it. Like from 4 individuals, we had almost 40 individuals last year, and it was their resting place. Actually, only for resting they used to come, and this year again we have only 5 and 6 individuals. So see, students or those who are listening to this, it's very important to have whatever Neha just resting place and a safe place. Why they must have chosen this? Usually they come to Bhigwan, Pashan, and many other areas surrounding Pune, but they chose Lavre campus, our own campus, and this small water body, and around 40 individuals means that's a large number. And it was really a very good thing, but again this year we have lost the numbers. So see, we have a lot of scope to work on and keep on working, and we know now where we are losing, why we are losing. The direct comparison and work results are showing here. So Neha, yes, your session again opened our eyes, and we have to work very hard and strong for our campus too.
I think every person makes a difference. I really believe, of course, systems need to change, but even that small water body, hopefully by next year, maybe the water levels will be fine for the ruddy shell ducks. But otherwise, you can make mounds, you can consider,
yes,
and make
we are
mounds for them,
we are
like habitat management. But, even that, makes a difference to those birds. And I don't think we should just be here to earn a salary and eat food and go to sleep every night. I think if we can do something for non-humans, that's really great, because I think it's not, the earth is not ours alone. There are other things here too, you know so it's really great that you're doing that. Yeah, in fact, I had spoken to some vice chancellors in West Bengal as well, because West Bengal has so many wetlands, and I told them, do not build over your wetlands in your campuses. Let them be wetlands, don't make it don't fill them up, and don't reclaim the land. It makes such a great difference, even to thirsty animals who don't have water to drink. It makes a difference to them as well.
So students, if you have any questions, please, you should have. Actually, this was really a wonderful session.
Ma'am, I have a question here.
Yeah.
So, ma'am, I always wanted to know that what do birds use for orientation and navigation when they do migration? So, do birds use landmarks to navigate?
Yeah. I wish I could give you the answer. We actually don't know. So there's some theory that, there's some theory about the magnetic pull of the poles, but I don't know. But yes, they do use landmarks, not just birds, animals also. They do remember places, and if the place changes very fast, they get confused. We've seen that even in elephants and tigers. So they have an aerial view, right? They're flying in the sky, so they remember the wetlands, they remember the cityscape, the trees, and they're very territorial. They come back to the same place every year. I've been observing certain places in where I live, not just in Delhi, but other places where I have field sites, and I see that they keep coming back. So yeah, I think it's a combination of instinct plus memory. And certainly, the birds and animals also, if they lose a herd member who's an adult or a senior, they are more confused. So even migration of elephants, there have been lots of studies. For example, in Africa, they do this trophy hunting, and when the herd senior, the matriarch, dies or is shot, the herd becomes very confused. It can't find water holes, it starts behaving in a random way because they've lost that memory bank. Because elephants live up to 70 years and they teach each other. So, yes, birds also teach each other. So, the seniors of the flock definitely are teaching the younger members where to fly, where to go, where to rest. And they do remember landmarks. And they also have, I think they also have certain instincts in terms of they are able to they're obviously able to tell the change in the weather and the length of the days based on which they start out in their migration, which is also true for butterflies. So in America, in United States of America, this is butterfly that actually looks like the tiger butterfly of India. So it's called the monarch butterfly. It's also in my book. It's an orange and black butterfly, and it migrates from North America right down to Mexico. And it doesn't live long enough to reach Mexico, so there are 3 or 4 generations of butterflies that are born on the way. So the last generation will reach Mexico, and then it'll go back up to the United States. And yeah, they are getting clues from the atmosphere and the change of the seasons. But for larger animals like birds and other animals, they are teaching each other. So they have memory, they have peer learning, they're learning from their peers, and they have instinct. And they have maybe some magical quality which we can't understand. But these are the things that we do understand. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am.
I have a small question, if may I?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. Thank you for this wonderful session.
You're
Ma'am,
welcome.
you indeed took a lot of effort to address us in this Sunday afternoon, and we are grateful for that. Ma'am, I was asking that what do you, as a conservation biologist, expect from the government to do more in terms of conserving these birds, and how can we really justify that the world is not really ours?
The government is not doing anything. The government is just destroying all the habitat. In the last few years and months, a lot of habitat has been destroyed. I think, the government needs to stop looking at forests and wetlands as sources of money. Do we live in a society or do we live in an economy? Yes, we live in an economy, but it's not just an economy, it's also a society, right? We do want a world where everything can't be a building, right? Everything can't be a factory or a mine. We also need places where we can just be walk freely. We also need places where there should be nature. So if you go to New York, everybody's in Central Park all the time because people want to be outdoors. And the government is behaving as if we only live in an economy and everything has a price on it. So they see a forest for the coal mines. They see wetlands for land to be developed. They see any place as a place to have an industrial project. And we are really doing very badly. A lot of elephant reserve in Assam was they want to do coal mining there in the Hing Patkai. They want to cut down all the sal trees next to the Dehradun airport, for example, to make the airport bigger. I think, what the government needs to understand is that it's a human need also to have nature. We can't just be living in boxes. Coronavirus showed us, even you're living in a house during corona pandemic, right? You have your food, you have your water, you have your drinks, you have your everything, and you have your computer. But were we happy? Can we be happy if we are not outside? And when I say outside, I don't just mean malls. You also need to walk in the open air. We also need air. We also need places that are open spaces, because actually we are animals. We keep forgetting this, and we need when you go out in nature, there are biochemical changes in your body, because plants give out a particular chemical that also impacts our mood and then makes us happier. It increases our immunity. If you go out in nature, your immunity will go up. This is a scientifically proven fact, because certain chemicals that plants are using to protect themselves from diseases also rubs off on us. So if you walk in the forest, you're going to be healthier than somebody who sits inside all day. This your mom will also tell you, that you should be walking and you should be doing exercise every day. But if you exercise in a gym as versus going outside in nature, your mental health will be better if you go outside in nature. And I think the government needs to be convinced that we don't just want a country where there are factories and mines and no environment, no wild nature. Nobody can live like that. All the countries that have destroyed their nature are now restoring it, whether it's China, whether it's Europe, whether it's, parts of USA. They're all trying to restore and go back because they understand that the degradation cost is too much. So we should stop pretending like everything is for sale. Everything should not be for sale. And I think more than anything, ethical reasons, I really feel, just like we say different kinds of people should live on earth, different kinds of animals should also live on earth. And it's the government is very vindictive. I write a lot. I get a lot of pressure from the government to not write. I get a lot of calls and a lot of those kind of things. But I think if people say that we want tigers also, we want birds also, and we want, development doesn't have to be the only way the government is suggesting. Usually they're just doing the easiest thing. So cutting a forest is really easy. There's nobody there to defend it, right? So they can't, destroy a colony of people because there are people there who'll say don't do anything. But usually whatever plans are there, alternatives are possible. So we need to engage with the government on suggesting alternatives or asking for alternatives. So is it necessary to cut the Sal forest, which is part of the elephant reserve, for the Dehradun airport? Or can we have some resiting? Or can we have some retrofitting? Everything doesn't need to be destroyed in order to. The other example is, in the Himalayas, is this Char Dham project, in which they are linking the Char Dhams, the holy spots, with roads. And they're basically cutting the mountain to make these huge roads. There have been many landslides where many people have died, and the people of the Himalayas who are living there are saying, don't do this, because once the tourists and pilgrims go, we are going to be stuck with a mountain that's unconsolidated. It's going to break and we are going to die. The government doesn't, have the energy to do anything in a better way because they only know one way. So we need to engage with them and say, let's find a different way. For example, you don't need to cut the mountain. You can make these steel braces that stick outside the mountain, which a lot of countries do, in which the road is part of a steel brace that's fitted into the mountain from the side, so that you're not having to dynamite blast the mountainside. So when you're dynamite blasting the mountainside, you're losing the trees, you're losing the topsoil, and you're losing the mountain itself. So the whole structure becomes loose and unconsolidated, and it can have many landslides, which has already happened because of the Char Dham project. Now, of course, it's very lucrative for the government. Usually these projects are very lucrative. A lot of people are making money. And, to protect a forest, nobody's getting money, it's just standing there. So if you make something else in the forest, you get money, contractors, tenders, etc. But I'm saying, let's not accept every project in the way it's presented. We are all intelligent people. We can think of a better way which is less harmful for the environment. I don't think anybody is saying that we should not develop, but the kind of development we want is something that we should have a say in, because we also live here and we are impacted by air pollution, by the loss of species, and also just by the impacts that these projects have on daily people every day.
Thanks a lot, ma'am. That was thought-provoking, and your thoughts on it is something that we should look upon. Thank you.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
So if students means what Neha is saying overall, like you have this privilege that you are studying law, you are studying engineering, you are in management, design, yeah, even journalism, means media. So each one of you can play a role, as Neha, said and suggested. We have to have some say, even though you are pursuing some different kind of profession, but related environment, wildlife, species, this is the time that each one of you have to have some or other say to protect whatever habitat we have surrounding us. You need not to work for Amu falcon or tigers, but you can work for the area nearby where you are staying, where you are living. That is also good enough to start.
I had
Fantastic.
written about butterflies in my book, and I met this bunch of people in Delhi, just like you, who didn't know too much, who were not conservationists to begin with. They were not, and now they've become citizen scientists in that they're, you know, contributing to data on butterflies, and they're monitoring butterflies. They've spoken to the local RWAs, and they've tried to convert the parks into butterfly friendly places. And, you know, they feel that they're part of something bigger than themselves, you know, because they're part of the life of another kind of species, and it gives them great satisfaction, because life in the city can be very stressful, you know. It has, you know, I think it's stressful to just see buildings, for example. To me, it's stressful if all you hear are the sound of horns and, you know, a lot of people talking all the time. So, you know, to think about a butterfly, or, you know, to monitor a butterfly habitat, or to contribute to having some wild life wilderness around you, has given a lot of people in the cities who've now become citizen scientists, has given them a purpose in life. And, you know, even that, you know, wildlife doesn't always mean tigers. There's also a lot of wildlife in cities. You know, it could be birds, it could be butterflies, it could be dragonflies. And, you know, if we see it and we identify it, you know, then we can begin to care for it. And I think it's themselves, you know, it's very important to love yourself, but also to love something else is really remarkable, I think.
So any other questions, students? Or if you have any other questions, you can write to Neha. She is on Instagram, even Twitter. We Biodiversity Cell is not on Twitter. Yeah, we have Instagram only. So, but you can get in touch with Neha. If anyone want to write to her or get connected through email, you have my email ID. All students, they have my email ID, and those who are not from Symbiosis, you can get connected with Neha on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook. So yeah, thank you very much, Neha.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it was really nice. So just by giving it to Devdatta for vote of thanks, I would like to have you in future, especially to talk about, you know, laws and policy making and those, you know, that aspect to interact with students on.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. I
Okay,
work on law every day of my life now. Almost become a lawyer. Sure, I'd be happy to. I'd be happy to.
So Dev, you can go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. I, on behalf of the entire biodiversity cell of Symbiosis International Deemed University, extend a hearty vote of thanks to our speaker, Ms. Neha Sinha, who spared time from her busy schedule to grace the occasion. Ma'am, today we were really fortunate to have this opportunity to hear from you about your thoughts and experiences. It was a very comprehensive session covering why, where, and how of bird migration. Your words helped us to break the myths we had on our minds about migratory locations. We learned how to identify birds from their various parts, about the high cost of migration, how adversely birds are being impacted by the climate change, and what are our commitment to migratory wildlife. While talking about the conservation of these magnificent birds, you raise the importance of passionate yet respectful and conservation practices in India. We are also eagerly looking forward to your book, Wild and Willful, and would like to extend our best wishes for the same. It is my privilege to propose a vote of thanks and acknowledge the contribution of those who worked hard to make this event happen. A special mention to Shilpa Apte ma'am for being the catalyst that stimulated us to do our best. We also extend our gratitude to all the students for their cooperation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And if you read the book, I would love to hear what you think. And if you see migratory birds, please get in touch with me if you need help identifying them. There are also a couple of apps that are there. One is Merlin app for birds. There's also iNaturalist. There's also Internet of Birds. So you can just do a search for apps if you can't identify the wild animal, and the apps can help you so that you can know what you're looking at. Otherwise, you can send it to me. And I'm not online all the time, but I take some time to respond, but I will respond in the end. Thank you so much. Thank you, Shilpa ma'am. Thank you to the students.
Have you taken a photo? I forgot.
Yes, ma'am. We have taken a lot of pictures, and hopefully we will narrate a good story on Instagram.
Okay.